Hello and welcome to SHOWstudio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from all parts of the industry discuss and debate the most important Fashion Week shows of the season. Today, in the midst of Paris Haute Couture, we're going to be discussing Margiela Artisanal Spring-Summer 20. I'm Bella Gladman, editorial associate at SHOWstudio, and I'd love my panellists to introduce themselves.
Cool. I'm James Small, so I'm a sustainable designer, freelance stylist, and model with First Model Management.
I'm Azzari. I'm a designer and a stylist.
Hello, I'm Gareth Chow. I'm currently a style consultant and also studying at Cass Business School as a business student.
Great. No, well, thank you very much for joining me today. So, the show was earlier. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about it. What did we like? What was our first impressions? Go.
It looks like a Dior. It looks more like a Dior show than a Margiela. There are so many nods to Margiela in it, but I thought perhaps from the colorways and the way it's all styled together, I think it looks more like a late Dior Galliano show than the other Margiela stuff that he's done. I think that's just because he's broken out into color, but more so than he has previously.
So, you'd say that maybe the Galliano signature is really coming through.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still intrinsically Margiela. It's still intrinsically Margiela through the way it's made, through the way it's finished, through the way it's styled, even. But it's much more identifiable than perhaps previous collections. I mean, to be honest, Galliano has a style which is non-negotiable. Like, you can't. It's unmistakable that it's Galliano, regardless of collection. However, I feel like it comes across strongest, I guess, with this collection, that it's very much Galliano. And it kind of pulls together his tenure at Dior and now Margiela, so much more concisely.
Yeah, totally. Azzari, what are your kind of first impressions?
I do like the collection. In terms of the colour palette, it's not for me.
But in terms, because it's too bright, or?
Too bright. But in terms of silhouette, garment construction technique, you can see that he's really progressed the codes of the house. But then he's ensured the heritage is still there without
combining
losing
the
it.
two. Yeah.
Right.
What about you, Gareth?
First of all, I'm a very big fan of John Galliano's design. From before in Dior and now in Margiela. I think this collection is definitely more feminine than before. The previous collection was more sensual and more industrial from the runway setting as well as the design. However, I think the fuchsia colored background is quite different from previously what he did for Margiela, and I agree with that opinion that it's more John Galliano than Dior, than Margiela. It's more like a Dior kind of vibe, very romantic, very decadent, and also very romantic. I like the color palette, actually, because I like the bright and bold color. I think that gives a lot of characteristic to the design as well. And I like he combined a lot of muted color as well, and also these boyish, uniform-inspired looking. And also he continued this cut-out technique on a lot of garments, continued from the previous couture collection as well as the ready-to-wear collection.
Yeah. So he's sort of expanding on themes that he's sort of already started to explore, and he's kind of taken them to a new kind of avenue in this one.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's one thing that really stands out to me, and this is a sort of styling point, is the colourful gloves. We've been seeing a lot of colourful gloves. So Prada menswear, we also had colourful gloves. We had Kim Jones's Dior Autumn Winter 20, Judy Blame inspired, with the elbow-length gloves, beautiful bright velvet. And so we're seeing some more couture bright gloves here. I think you heard it here first, guys. Gloves are a mood. I think also it's something that creates that sort of air of fantasy, of mystery. It is something dramatic, which, as we know, Galliano is a real, of which he's a massive fan. I think you can definitely see, I'm really noticing the more we look at the pictures, that the Margiela-ness, actually, because we're seeing the face coverings, which is a very sort of Margiela kind of trope. It's got the kind of the cutaways, these sort of half and half deconstruction aspects to it as well. So I'm kind of, I guess, I kind of really wanted to sort of touch on a little bit where, how we feel this collection is for John Galliano at Margiela. Like we've seen since he sort of rejoined fashion and joined the house in 2014, 2015, you know, he was very much, it was like, what is he going to do? How is he going to take this further? How can a designer that's so known as their own personal celebrity take Margiela, the house famed for anonymity and sort of not giving that personality? How is he going to kind of bring that together? How do you feel John Galliano is doing at Margiela, really?
Amazingly.
Amazing. Okay.
Amazing.
Good to know. Good
But I mean,
to know.
I'm very, very biased because I think I probably will always stand John, just because I just think he's very, very intelligent. He's of a breed of designers which you don't necessarily find, or you don't find as easily anymore. So I think no matter where he goes or what he does, it will always be interesting. It will always be his character. It will always look like a Galliano piece, and I think there'll always be a place for him because no one else does anything like him. So I think it doesn't surprise me that his contract was renewed, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was renewed until a point at which he could no longer renew it, similar to Dior. But I don't think there is reason for them to end it anytime soon, because what he's making is selling, as far as I'm aware, and it's also getting the right press attention and being styled in the right places. So there isn't really many negatives to the output at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Gareth, I know you've done a lot of studies on business. In terms of how this works in a business setting, or you know how the John Galliano kind of presence at Margiela is working, like what's your take on that?
Well, I think what they have selling in store is definitely reflecting a very good revenue. As people always say, on Asian market, because I think for the Asian customers now they like very innovative pieces like John Galliano does. But from couture perspective, because I think for some markets they're still exploring, which means they are still being quite conservative about choosing the garments as a couture.
Yeah.
And people might have quite a conservative concept about couture as well. So I think for such an innovative, creative way to do couture, I personally respect it because I studied fashion as well. So I always love to see the creative, the brave part of the couture to explore different materials and to define the couture in a very modern way. But I do think for the couture, for Margiela, that he does in Margiela, I think there's still a little bit question about it.
Because it is so experimental, and like you said, that you've got the Daphne Guinnesses who kind of wear these incredible directional pieces, and there's that couture market. But a lot of couture is sold to people who they are going to dinners, they're going to galas, and they may not be wanting to kind of completely reconfigure the fashion body, which maybe Margiela's is doing here.
Yeah, but it also might be the styling in the runway as well, because usually on the runway you do much more creative styling just to show the strong mood for the collection. So I can actually see a lot of pieces in here. You can separate them and make it into very elegant pieces. For example, those tweed skirt and jackets, and also the wool-made jacket, and also those cut-out dresses. For example, this one it can also be very sophisticated if you wear in some very sophisticated occasions to match with something else. But I know that he might no longer like an embellishment as an element, because for Margiela the code is never going to be crystals embellishment. It's always going to be something more experimental, deconstructing. So I think certain pieces they will attract some more customers. But for the whole look, I think for the coverage, for the celebrity point of view, they will have very good exposure. For example, you see a lot of new artists would wear something like this to Met Gala to have a very nice exposure and press coverage. I think I'm really looking forward to see how he's going to do on the sales sector for the haute couture. Well,
okay, watch this space. We'll update you on figures when we have them. Actually, what you said about the Met Gala is quite interesting, because the theme coming this year is about time. And so that was and I think history and remembrance was a massive thing for Galliano this season. I listened to his podcast that he makes with Margiela about Yeah, it's really good. I love it.
I love hearing him because he can talk for days.
It's like a story.
It is. It's so nice to actually hear the designer themselves speaking rather than someone else sort of dissecting it. And he spoke a lot about this idea of remembrance, particularly politically. So talking about the kind of shifts that are happening with Brexit, the UK will be leaving the European Union at the end of the month, and he mentioned that the European Union was initially founded, post the war to create unity, and actually it's become this real place of divisiveness, especially in the UK. And he also referenced this documentary that he saw on the BBC about a World War II veteran called K.T. Robbins. So he met this and fell in love with this young French girl while he was in France during the war, and they never saw each other again. And then this documentary reunited them after 75 years. And he said, this kind of thing of love across borders and history and remembrance, like. He said, I was on the floor crying, which was just, I don't know, there's something really wonderful to hear that kind of thinking about the past and how to bring that into a modern collection, especially when we're in a new decade. And I kind of wanted to know how you felt about the kind of historical references in the collection, because, we have got kind of much more kind of glamorous silhouettes. I think there's, the coats especially feel quite sort of 1940s. The hats as well feel sort of another era. And how do you feel like that works for now, and what do you think he's trying to say with them?
I think he's like giving a nod to the past, but you can see through the proposal of silhouette that he still has that sense of modernity in mind. So it will always be very progressive with Galliano.
Yeah.
But you can tell that there's like nods to the past. It feels quite romantic in that sense, but it's still with that like element of futurism.
Yeah, I know you do a lot of work about sort of modernity and how to sort of design for that in, today.
Right.
How can you use the past to create modernity? Like, does modernity require you kind of ignoring it, or whether it's, how can you use the past in modernity, really?
I think you can analyse it and analyse behaviour and culture and politics and things like that, and it can synthesise into silhouette and design, and you can kind of use it in that way. I tend to look more at the present moment, which he talks about slightly, and then also just predictions of the future, what it's going to feel like. I know for him it's quite emotive, the process, so he seems to be able to translate his emotions into, texture and silhouette and form, and it's clever. I think he's a really clever designer.
No, I heartily agree. Joshua, what do you feel about like modernity? How does that come across here?
Well, I was going to say, because I was reading into it and like also listened to the podcast, and the way he's gone about the collection, I'm kind of interested in terms of like fabrication, but more so we'll start with like, he was talking about consumerism and capitalism, and obviously in this world we overconsume at a ridiculous rate, as I say all the time. And he was kind of looking at that time that you mentioned, that sort of thing. It was born out of like the bourgeoisie, kind of like, and all of that. That idea of consumerism and capitalism was born out of the bourgeoisie, and he was kind of looking at how that is relevant today, and then the idea of heritage and looking back at different periods of time, including that story, and how we can, whether that's relevant. And he was talking about the fabrication, so reusing and reworking pieces. So I'm really interested. It doesn't actually say anywhere, and I would really, really be interested to know how much of this collection is reworked pieces and how much is like virgin fibre. Because he talks about, I think it's really interesting, but he talks about luxury and what luxury is today, and he says that luxury today is like an ethical consciousness. So a lot of luxury today is about being ethical and being conscious of what you're making and being sustainable. I know these are a lot of buzzwords, but I can't decipher whether he is also using them as buzzwords and that are just thrown around for the sake of it because he can apply them, or whether this collection is actually quite considerate of forward-thinking mindset towards design. But then I also found myself thinking, which goes against all of my natural instincts, because I want to push this idea of sustainability, and I think it should be ingrained in every brand. But I do personally think that, like we said off air, that I don't think that couture necessarily needs to consider it as much, because organically couture is sustainable by default, because for something to be declared as couture, you can only make 3 pieces of it to begin
like
with.
the opposite of fast fashion,
Yeah, it's the opposite of fast fashion entirely.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, if you make more than three of the one look, it's no longer classed as couture.
And you'll be struck from the calendar.
Yeah, well, exactly.
The Chambre Syndicale was Margiela Paris.
Well, exactly. So I'm really interested as to whether, personally, my first thought was, I don't think, in a sense of like over-consumerism and over-producing, I don't think that necessarily needs to be considered when thinking about couture, because couture is by default sustainable. In terms, I think perhaps push the idea of fabrication, so that you're using perhaps more sustainable fibres instead of virgin fibres, and I'm really interested in what he says about upcycling, but I don't think that you necessarily need to panic too much, because when the real criminals are places like H&M and Zara, who are pumping out on a 3-week cycle clothing that costs less than you would spend on your lunch. So
yeah, maybe it's not like a relevant.
I think there's 2 ends of the spectrum. I think we've got so lost in what we want from sustainability, and I'm striving for that conversation to be pushed. But I think we've got so lost that I think something like couture doesn't necessarily need to worry so much, because couture is to push ideas and to push art to a further point. It's to push the cultural conversation, whereas sustainability needs to be tackled at the root of the problem, which is fast fashion.
Yeah.
And we think of fast fashion as Zara and H&M, all those places, but actually in 2020, it's places like Boohoo and Pretty Little Thing that are the real criminals, because they're pumping out fashion almost within a 24-hour cycle, which is ridiculous. And you can order that and get it, like I said, sent for less than your lunch would cost. So people don't have any mental association with that piece being of value, so they dispose of it after they've worn it once. But a couture garment can cost 30,000 up, and those people are not disposing of it. That garment is going to last forever until it practically biodegrades. So I'm really interested in this whole idea of sustainability being incorporated in that. I know that was like a long, but I was really fascinated. It was the first thing that, because it was what he mentions as soon in the podcast. So I guess it's a key thing for him.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something he's looking into, and I guess there's this idea of sort of time and memory in this, and I think that actually links really back to some of Margiela's, the original Martin Margiela kind of tropes or things that he's most famed for, because if we think about Margiela's stuff with the toile, and you can see the tacks and the tailoring marks on things. When you imagine sort of typical or like famous Margiela pieces, and then we can see that kind of coming through a bit on some of the garments here, and so you can actually see almost the life cycle of production across a garment, which is maybe something that Galliano is like tying between the two, between like the history of Margiela and also the current topic of sustainability, even if, like you said, actually sustainability doesn't, that's not necessarily the most relevant conversation for couture.
Yeah, it seems, because it's also, I know that a lot of brands use sustainability as a way of getting their brand talked about also, because obviously it makes them relevant, because it's top. But this collection is strong, and people already look at Margiela, so I don't understand. It just seems like a strange perspective to add in there, unless he's really focusing on fabrication, in which case I want to know more. I want to know more about what it's actually made of, because that would be a good angle to go down. But he didn't mention about that, so I'm conflicted.
We'll see. I mean, one thing that we're showing a little bit of a video here from the show, and there's some really major walks going on here. It's it is a bit performative. Particularly last, for the ready-to-wear season, there was that famous walk from Leon Dahmer, where he sort of, strutted down the runway to Marie Davidson's work in a little sailor hat and boots, and it was just the most kind of alarming and absurd kind of caricature of a model walk, but it was kind of the best thing I'd ever seen. And we're seeing the same kind of slightly kind of mincing, slightly kind of seductive walk happening here. This is the Leon Dahmer look, which, it really is iconic, and I don't really use that word lightly. And I wanted to know kind of what you felt like, especially for this couture season, what that energy was, and what that kind of, why the choice of that walk. What does that say about where we are with couture and where we are with Margiela right now? What do you think, guys?
You want that, like, you want that walk. You want that. No, the reason he's become so popular, I think if other people did it, it wouldn't be as popular, but it became meme-worthy and shared everywhere because nobody has that sense of attitude. I mean, there are a select pool of models that have that attitude, but people are striving and gagging for that kind of Galliano girl that would walk, or McQueen girl even, that would walk down the runway and...
It would be a moment.
It would be a moment because they would interact kind of, not necessarily directly, but they would interact through the way they move, through the way, it's playing a character. A show is a show at the same, like the definition of show is to entertain, essentially. So by putting clothes down the runway and just walking them up and down, it enforces that fast fashion model because it's just in and out. But you're creating a show, you're creating a moment. You want to, because a show was always to push boundaries and then it would diffuse down into pieces that you would buy.
Yeah, that Devil Wears Prada kind of, conversation.
It's that rhetoric. But we've come to a place in society where a show is now just a showcase of pieces, one after the other, to consume then and there.
Yeah.
With the short-lived See Now Buy Now is a good example of that,
yeah.
Which was awful to start with. But I mean, it's just become essentially a shop. But a show is a show. You want to be entertained, so you want people that are going to walk down and give you something which makes you scream. You want something that's going to make you gasp.
It's memorable. I think it brings...
Well, you double take,
Yeah, I think it brings like a stronger emotional connection to the designs when you've seen them kind of inhabited in this way. And I know, Azzari, that's kind of what you were talking about as Galliano as an emotional designer.
Right.
I guess what's your kind of emotional response to this? Are you carried away with that sense of fantasy, or does it feel a little bit alien to you?
If I'm being honest, it doesn't completely resonate.
Yeah.
I think I can appreciate it without it actually aesthetically resonating.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I listened to the podcast, everything that he said made sense. And the way he's approached this collection and to see his journey as a designer in Margiela, I think it's interesting, and it will be interesting to see how he's able to translate the pieces in the ready-to-wear collection, what will work and what won't work.
Yeah.
I find that more interesting.
Yeah.
But the couture, not 100% sold.
Well, I suppose for the thing about couture, it being so sort of far removed from the kind of daily lived experience of fashion necessarily, that, actually some of this stuff does, on first look to me like, it reminds me of like quite modern art. I've got vibes from the Centre Pompidou as well going on here with the kind of the cutouts and the colouring and the sort of plasticky nature of it, which feels to me like a moment in art that perhaps is not the current one where we're at the moment, where I'm seeing actually in art so much more in video and kind of imagining new futures, and it feels like a kind of a backwards look at things rather than we're trying to redefine what the future might look. But I guess actually, Gareth, I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about the kind of, going back to the walk. We had, it was a male model that was walking in this incredibly feminine way with the cutouts. And it's, and you mentioned earlier that the collection, you felt this one was actually incredibly feminine. And I wanted to know how you kind of how you felt Galliano was doing in terms of those gender kind of roles, and whether it's actually whether we even need to ask that question.
Well, I think throughout his all his collections in Margiela, the gender scheme of things is always happening in the runway, from the casting and also the way him or the stylist dresses the model as well, because you can see from this collection some particular looks that are handled by some male models, but they look extremely androgynous. And I actually think it's a brilliant idea, because a lot of people, I think a lot of designers, they play with gender as an idea. But as you mentioned before, I think Margiela show is very performative. So it sort of brings out the spirit and characteristic of the gender-related things, and to blend into his design. Because I think a lot of his design, they are very gender neutral. He looks at a lot of men's uniform and translate into the female look, into the gown and into the coats as well.
Yeah.
I do think the gender is a big part in his aesthetic and design at the moment, which I think before at Dior it was more feminine than being a bit of both. Because, for example, this look, you have quite a men's tailoring inspired suit, but you transferred into sort of feminine way, and you styled with those volumized, how do you call this fabric?
Oh, like the tulle?
The tulle.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think it's an interesting combination of the femininity and masculinity, and also the fact that he always likes to play with a silhouette, and silhouette is always his big part in his collections. I think it's not necessarily need to be mentioned because it's already there.
Yeah.
But it's also
maybe
something
drawing
worth to
attention
mention,
it.
the way he works around it as well. Yeah.
I think the silhouette is actually a really interesting point that you brought up there because, you know, like we've said, Galliano is kind of known for creating that drama, and that especially with when you're playing with gendered fashion, male, female or unisex, often maybe the silhouette, particularly when androgynous fashion or gender fluid fashion is brought up, then the silhouette is almost removed, or it becomes a masculine silhouette that women are put in. And actually I think there's something really really interesting about drawing the eye to a feminine silhouette on a male body, and not sort of making it go just the other way, like putting women in menswear. You know what we haven't even talked about yet is the Margiela-Tabi / Reebok collaboration, which we were all kind of like, what? To earlier. So basically, we've got some, so it's trainers. So the Margiela-Tabi boot, famously, the split toe. Azzari has got some split toe tabbies going on right here, combined with Reebok's Insta Fury pump. So create this sort of hybrid, high top trainer / ankle boot thing. Was going to say monstrosity. Don't know if I'm a fan. What are your takes on it?
No.
No.
I can see how they work, but they don't. Then, like we said off air, like it's not a couture shoe.
It isn't.
It's not a couture shoe. It's not chic. I mean, I'm sure he thinks it is, but it looks like a Balenciaga trainer. Everyone, those like really ugly ones.
Yeah,
I really don't know. There's so many different variations of those really ugly trainers that everyone keeps trying to make happen. But
I mean, are we over the big sneaker? Are we over the chunky trainer?
Yeah, I think we're
Guys,
over
you heard it here first. Again, we're all wearing plimsolls now. Like chunky sneakers, they're gone. So, but
it serves a purpose. I can guarantee that half of CSM will be in those awful trainers for a good half a year. But I mean, I don't think they're going to be widely popular, because it's almost like. But you get this kind of at the end of a trend, you'll get people that will still push it, and maybe they see money in that. Maybe because it is still making money. Maybe people still are buying those trainers. So it made logical sense as a safety net, perhaps, because this collection is more experimental in terms of all of the other garments, especially since we don't know how much is upcycled and not. We don't know how much can be reproduced. So maybe the collaboration is a safety net in terms of making money.
Yeah, I mean, Gareth, what do you think in terms of like sales? Like, because obviously typically it's shoes, accessories that sell, like, are the prime kind of monetary income streams for a house, mainly because they're usually cheaper or more accessible. How do you think this is going to go?
Well, first of all, I don't think trainers or sneakers will enter the door of couture. This is not very couture-like. But also, I agree with you about couture that it's naturally sustainable because you can't make many pieces for one look. So I actually have a question about this collaboration. Is his new idea of blending into some mass production items into the couture collection?
Yeah, just my question, 'cause as I said it, I was like,
that's interesting.
Yeah,
how does that work?
Yeah.
For these trainers, so first of all, it's just my opinion. I don't really believe you can only make 3 of them because they look like they're not very difficult to make. And also, if it's a collaboration with Reebok, it doesn't carry the spirit of luxury fashion. It's a street fashion. So if you include these kind of street fashion items in a couture fashion show, does that mean you're going to separate two lines into your collection, so you sell the couture to high-end clients, and you only make 3 pieces per item, and then the rest of the sneakers just goes into the mass production markets like Selfridges, Dover Street Market. You try to sell to some aspiring customers who wants couture and who wants to feel the vibe of couture, but they can actually afford and access to the sneakers.
Yeah.
And when they wear them, they can actually think, oh, they can say to other people, oh, this is from couture collection. Is it actually couture?
Well, that's a really good question because, you know, Reebok, you know, selling, you know, affordable trainers, you know, it's a mass sneaker brand. You know, that is really at odds with what couture could be, as you pointed out, you guys. So, I don't really know.
I feel like a fraud though. If I would like you said, I mean, like if people wear them because they want to feel like they're part of it, or they're, I guess, like you would do a purse or a perfume, you buy it because you can't afford the real pieces. I'd feel like such a fraud if I was walking around in a pair of shoes and I was like, oh, these are from the couture collection, because you obviously can't afford couture, and it's the most like
affordable
separate thing from couture. A trainer is so far removed from what couture should be. Yeah. So you'd feel like a fraud saying this is couture or representative of the couture collection. It would. It's at odds.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It feels quite dated as well. Like this is something like a trainer was like 2017, 18, and we're kind of over it now. So to introduce a trainer in a collab, it just feels dated.
Yeah, it feels, you know, you know, what you guys have been saying, that, you know, there's often when a trend is sort of on its out or on its last legs, that there will be people who are still trying to get on it, and that doesn't seem very Galliano in a way. He doesn't seem like, you know, I love Madonna, but there was definitely that phase where she did her album like MDNA and she was trying to get on the EDM dance craze, and it was a bit like...
Yeah, it was a bit too much.
Like, Madonna, I love you, but you're late on this, and, you know, you're not defining the direction the way you used to. Like, this looks kind of like you're scrabbling to be relevant.
Right.
I, again, like, you know, I compared Madonna to Galliano in that sense that they have often defined the direction of fashion.
They're leaders.
And so this sneaker collab doesn't feel like the front of a wave. It feels like the end of tailing off of a wave.
Completely.
In terms of the silhouette for a woman, a flat shoe perhaps makes more logical sense in this day and age. I personally love a ridiculous shoe, especially for a couture show. I like those shoes that, not that I want to injure anyone, but I like them to put on a show. I want them to be spectacles. I want them to be teetering around. But in 2020, a flat shoe probably makes more sense for your average woman. But yeah, again, this is couture, so you should be pushing it to the point at which you have got those ridiculous shoes, whereas these are shoes which, do you know what I mean? So like your average businesswoman would probably, if they were looking at a collection, they would want to see a flat shoe because they would want to know what they can actually purchase and actually wear.
But yeah, I suppose it's not relevant.
With this space. Yeah, again, so overall, the trainers are just an odd fit.
An oddity, absolutely. An oddity. So I guess, you know, I think there's some really interesting pieces in here. Are there any sort of standout looks that you think, you know, you can automatically see is going to be like a cover look, or it's going to be somewhere?
The trench coat, I think, will do well editorially, just because it's a staple Margiela piece.
That green one is just kind of really quite special. It's with that sort of detachable collar. It sort of feels deconstructed. It feels Galliano. It feels like 2004 Dior with those kind of like...
I was going to say, that looks almost like an evolved version of a Dior coat. It was a much more cinched coat, but it had so much volume from it. I could not tell you what collection is for the life of me. But same same colourway, if I'm correct in saying.
Yeah.
So it's almost like in his head, he's taken. Maybe it's an upcycled Dior that he's wheeled in and repurposed for the sakes of this, which would be wonderful.
Yeah, and I just like that it is that kind of sort of, it does feel a little bit falling apart, and you know, maybe that's a comment on the political situation at the moment, but who knows? But I like I actually really like the styling of this. This is going to be something that, you know, I am looking forward to seeing more of. We've actually, across menswear, I know this is couture, but across menswear, we've seen a lot of sort of the like this scarf motif. We saw that at a Cold Wall, and kind of like the hanging and the sort of drapery of garments on top of one another, which I think that's a really interesting thing. I feel like he's very in tune with where fashion is at the moment, at least in that respect.
He styles it himself, right? If I'm right to say. So,
I
never
think
lists
so.
anyone. So, and I've had a little look quickly, but just to double check before I say anything. But I'm pretty sure he styles it. Obviously, he has a team to work with him, but like, I'm assuming that the direction comes from him. But it's like, look, my favourites are like, it's like 23. I think it's like far down in the collection. It's like midway. It's an enormous dress. Can't miss it.
Enormous dress.
That one there we go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that is gorgeous. And that will probably be borrowed from the Met, I would assume.
I want to see Frances McDormand in it.
Yes,
She will do it really well.
Work.
She will do it really well. Did she wear Margiela or did she wear Valentino for the last Met Gala? I think she was wearing a sort of a big green gown.
I can't remember.
Frances McDormand, can you remember? Oh, well, never mind. Sorry, it was last year anyway. I don't know why we're talking about it now. You know, one thing I'm quite intrigued by are the hats as well. Just because we often see like a Galliano hat. We've seen a lot, you know, they're sort of unusual little cloche things.
Is it Stephen Jones? Jim Jones stuff? Or is it Philip Tracy?
You know, I'm not entirely sure.
Because I'm not sure. I mean, for a press release, it's very vague.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't have anyone on it.
Yeah.
Maybe he did it himself.
Yeah, so if you guys can find out that.
So,
did the hats.
you know, we'll have to add it into the content, the comments later. But they create this kind of, there is a sort of level of found object or like something found in a sort of, you know, a vintage store or, you know, on a market or something, which I like that sort of magpie aesthetic, which I've been thinking about a lot because of Judy Blame and his tribute and the tribute to him at Dior. But yeah, no, I like it. I can see one of maybe the Fanning sisters, Dakota, or what's her sister called? Elle Fanning.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that blue.
I think they're representatives of Margiela. Did they wear Margiela? I think.
I know they wear Miu Miu a lot. So,
Yeah.
because they're again that sort of directional, cute thing. But I can kind of see them.
I couldn't actually tell you who a Margiela woman is. Like, I don't. I actually wouldn't. I mean, anyone, I guess. But there isn't. He doesn't have a select set of people that he dresses, I don't think.
Not in the way that sort of like, you know, you think it gets
like a cult, or like a Balmain
kind
of culty brand.
Yeah, it feels a little bit more, I don't know, fluid, or actually, you know, people do have their own emotional connections to it.
Yeah.
The only person I can think of that wears Margiela, or famously has worn Margiela, is Anna Wintour when Galliano was sort of returning. So.
But she's a big fan of Galliano because she started him essentially. So
yeah, no,
I think she'll be wearing him till
a background thing.
Death do us part.
So I think, you know, I guess let's wrap it up. I think we've brought up some really interesting stuff here about kind of the nature of couture and what Galliano's been doing with it. Any last words? Any last thoughts?
I was going to add just slightly before we wrap, like the fabrication, if we could talk about like quickly. Because he was talking about like the way it's cut. I think I originally instinctively thought it looked like student work. You know, when you cut away pieces to make like a little textile and you add that on and you're like, oh, it's creative.
Right, okay.
But it's the idea of exposing, because he was talking about this idea of renewal and using old pieces and recycling. But obviously it's from a virgin fibre. But it's that idea he talked about, like a woman putting on a jacket back to front. It's this that idea of rebelling against the bourgeoisie. It's kind of like if you were part of the bourgeoisie, you might go for fittings quite a lot for certain garments and pieces.
Get your
it's that kind of in between stage. It's that luxury of that, and it was the rebelling against that this collection essentially is talking to, which is why you've got all of these little bits that are cut out, which is why some of the jackets are inside out. Obviously fits in with the Margiela ethic, but he talked about these circles as if they were sequins, which I thought was quite interesting, because they're not necessarily sequins. However, they do create a very interesting textile, but they're all cut on the bias. And he was talking about a new, as always, obviously he's a master with bias cutting, but he was talking about finding new ways to do bias cutting and cut on the bias, and he was saying all these holes create a different way that the fabric stretches, and you've got this new way it's sewn, so you've got like one seam down the back kind of thing, which allows the fabric to move in a different way. So I thought it was quite, from a textiles perspective and from fabrication, I think it's quite interesting what he's produced there. And I think perhaps because this is first foray into doing this sort of, I suppose, more handcraft in terms of creating this specific textile, maybe next season or for the more commercial seasons, it'll be more developed and more refined, which could produce something quite interesting.
Yeah, actually, I've now remembered from that, and on the podcast, you mentioned that it's like the industrialization of the polka dot, which is called a couture cliche. That that you'd find these sort of glamorous ladies in polka dotted things, and that he's kind of industrialized it by using the hole punch kind of motif.
Yeah.
And now you look at it, you do feel like if that was all filled in, if that was a solid fabric, that maybe would be a less interesting garment.
Yeah,
but now he's created these kind of like ways to see differently through the fabric, and knowing that the fabric itself is moving differently.
And when you watch it move, it moves in a different way to perhaps what you would expect a trench coat to move, or what you would expect a dress to move in specifically.
Absolutely.
Even down to some of the dresses, because I think he called it like a lace-like technique, because obviously he's got lace later on, so I guess that links the two in, so you've got a continuation and a more concise output of material. This dress is gorgeous. I think that'll be borrowed quite a lot. Because when you separate it out, I'm pretty sure the underlayer can be taken off it, and then it's just a beautiful black lace dress, which I could guarantee that it will be on a cover somewhere at some point within the next 6 months.
So yes, no, I can totally.
I thought I should mention about fabrics. I think it's quite interesting in terms because he's always known for experimenting with bias cutting, and he is a master of it. So it's quite interesting that he's still all this time in finding new ways to produce pieces which move in a different way through that form of cutting.
Absolutely. Azzari, what's your kind of summing up feeling on this?
I can appreciate it, as I said. I think it's a strong collection. I think some of the ideas, they're innovative and forward-thinking. I like it, I guess.
Like it, you guess.
I like
it. It's a yes, and it's also a...
Yeah, aesthetically, I mean, just looking at it, it doesn't resonate. But then when you break down the pieces, and I think when I see pieces editorially, or if I was to see them up close, I think technically it's so strong, and he's always going to be the designer that's able to do that, probably more so than anybody else, because he's so experimental. And this, I think designers need space for couture, because that's where progress is made. And we start to see that filter down and through mainstream. So yeah. Good job, I guess.
Good job, I guess. Okay. And Gareth, what's your, what would be your final word on this?
Okay, so I think it's very interesting that we mentioned about the time and the emotions about the design and how time flows and process, the stories from past and linked to the modernity. I do think this collection, from what I see, it's also, I think, is a little bit tribute to what he's used to do. To his old aesthetics, we see a lot of reflections in here. So final words on the polka dot cutouts. I think it's a little bit overexposed, because we've seen that pretty much about 4 seasons or a little bit more. So I think just as a personal perspective, I'm looking forward to seeing more techniques on playing with different cutouts or whatever. And as we discussed, I think the uncertainty is from the Reebok collaborations for the trainers. I think that brings out some questions, uncertainties about the collection as well, and also the future directions of the couture show. Is he gonna do more collaborations with the high street brands to attract potentially more customers, or he's gonna stay with this high aesthetic and exclusivity of the couture collection? I think that's also a question to be discussed about. But in general, I really like the collection. I think he's doing a completely opposite way compared to other brands, we say mainstream brands like Ruff & Russo or Elisab. They do a lot of collections that attract a lot of customers, a lot of press, but doesn't necessarily carry much emotions as John Galliano's design. So I think this is a very emotional collection, very personal, very editorial-like. Definitely not a September issue kind of look, but it's very creative and it's very memorable.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Good sentence, just a quick sentence from, I've read it the other day, it was a tweet by Panboy, so Pierre, and he was like, couture is the next big flex, and I think that is true. I think couture is where it's at and where it will be as we go into the next decade. More attention will be on couture as sustainability pushes ready-to-wear to shrink because we don't need any more clothes.
Right, yeah.
Couture is the next big flex.
Yeah.
Couture is the next big flex. Thank you, Pierre, Panboy. That was great. Right. Thank you so much, panellists, for coming in and helping me discuss and break down all of this. And thank you to everyone who was watching. For more extensive Fashion Week coverage, be sure to visit SHOWstudio.com. And if you're watching via Show Studio's YouTube, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below. We'll see you next time. Thank you.